Good morning to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 9th day of July 2013. Tropical Storm Chantal, obviously the headline right now in the Atlantic as it bears down on the Lesser Antilles. Right now, pretty close to Barbados and tracking still pretty fast, moving at more than 20 miles per hour. 5-day forecast track aims it through the islands today, then into the eastern Caribbean, finally over the Dominican Republic and maybe parts of Haiti. This area of the world pretty mountainous, so a lot of rainfall could be wrung out from this system over that area. And then if Chantal survives this trek over the island here, then the next several days could be pretty interesting as it tries to slow down here in the Bahamas and north of the Bahamas, maybe going back and then turning southwest somewhere in this area. Some of the models indicating that it may impact Florida early next week. We'll take a look at that and why that could be the case on the GFS model in just a minute. Let's look at a satellite picture, a loop of Chantal, and you'll notice that it doesn't really have the organization that it did yesterday, lacking some of the banding cloud features that it was so prevalent yesterday as it really started to ramp up. This is a visible satellite shot. In other words, it's kind of what it would look like if you were out in space looking down. You're not looking at cloud top temperatures or anything like that. It's just a black and white visible satellite photo, and then it's, in this case, a series of photos and animation of where Chantal is down here in the Lesser Antilles region. And you can tell it's not really that impressive this morning. A lot of that owed to the fact that it's moving fairly quickly. Very strong trade winds coming through this area, whisking the storm along on the southern periphery of a pretty strong Bermuda high sitting out over the western Atlantic. And that fast forward motion does not allow the storm to consolidate as well, and it doesn't really have a chance to strengthen when it's doing that, although the wind speed, as reported by aircraft recently, may be as high as 60 miles per hour. And you can see right here as the sun comes up, there's a pretty good convective burst, and that's a fancy term for thunderstorms that are going up, that upward motion. And typically when you get that convection, that upward motion of a thunderstorm complex rising into the atmosphere, you can get some pretty strong winds underneath that. And so folks down in the Windward Islands, all the way up to as far north as Guadeloupe, which is the one that looks like a butterfly right there, you could be under the gun today for some gusty winds, maybe even some strong gusty winds as this passes through, heavy rain squalls. You're used to this being down in the tropics. You know what to expect, but every one of these systems is different. They each bring their own set of those different effects: strong winds, heavy rains, and even an increase in storm surge in the area because of the wind field of this system pushing the water towards any of those land masses down there. But once it gets out towards Hispaniola here is where I think the biggest concern will be for the mountains down here to wring out a lot of that moisture. Not so much as that it'll weaken the storm, which is a good thing, but the negative impacts on people down there that could be susceptible to flash flooding and all kinds of problems as Chantal moves through. So let's take a look at a few different graphics here. One is the vorticity. I've been talking about the vorticity graphic over the last several days, and you can see very clearly this morning that Chantal, a little bit more round in appearance. The vorticity, or the spin in the atmosphere associated with it here at the 5,000 foot level, much more round in appearance. So overall, it's got good bundling of energy, and its vorticity signature pretty healthy. And so it's got that going for it, but boy, that fast movement is a problem for it if it's trying to strengthen. Here's another satellite shot I wanted to show you. This is an interesting perspective. Again, just looking at this, you can see it's pretty much just a mass of clouds. You're not seeing that healthy banding look to the clouds where they arc in like this with strong spiral banding. That's not evident. I have to draw it in, make believe here with the telestrator, that it's just lacking that. Instead, you do have this mass of thunderstorms that has developed right here, this convection and that might be where the strong winds are being found at the moment. The aircraft, Hurricane Hunter aircraft flying in here, sampling the environment around this area, and I think it's more of the convective activity creating that wind burst than anything else, because you can clearly see it's not very well organized. All kinds of globs of showers and thunderstorms out ahead of it, and it's just lacking that very well-defined banded look that we expect when we're looking at a healthy tropical system. Sea surface temperatures, this is interesting. I want to just kind of touch upon this real quick. In the region where Chantal is, right here, just entering the Lesser Antilles, water temperatures running a quarter to a half a degree Celsius above normal. Above the average is a better way to put it. And then as it treks north, eventually west-northwest towards Hispaniola into the Bahamas, water temperature is about normal to maybe just a little bit below. Really nothing out of the ordinary to any extreme in that region. In fact, if we look at the ocean heat content, this is interesting. This is a wide shot of the Atlantic Basin. This is the amount of heat content in the ocean. And what we're really looking for here, anything on the higher end of the scale in its path, no there isn't. Ocean heat content, yeah, kind of moderate through this region here, closer to the Greater Antilles, and low to moderate amounts of heat content in the Bahamas. And what that means is that it will have slightly warmer sea surface temperatures and more heat content to work with. And what that means is that when it moves along, it's able to churn up the water, and it's not churning up cold water, it's churning up more warm water, and that's what we call heat content. And you can see that on a zoomed in map here of the Caribbean, that it's going to move over increasing heat content values to some extent, especially right before Hispaniola. And then in the Bahamas, low to moderate amounts of heat content there. Really not a big deal until you get over to the Western Caribbean in terms of high heat content values. And this time of the year, early July, the ocean heat content is still on the rise and is not quite where it's going to be headed for when we get to August and September. Let's look at the models real quick for Chantal. Really interesting spread. You remember the last few days, the models indicating that it would cut across and then kind of turn north, maybe even turn on out to sea. That's kind of what most people expect with these systems. Well, lately, it has been the trend for the models to bend back to the west. And this is all assuming that the system survives its trip, its possibly life-altering trip over Hispaniola, a very mountainous area, and it could tear it up and dissipate it. We'll have to wait and see. But most of the models, they show this bend back towards the northwest here instead of curving out to sea. Why is that? Well, let's take a look at that. I examined this yesterday on the GFS, and we'll do the same again today. To get your bearings as to what we're looking at, this is the 500 millibar, or about 18,000 feet in the atmosphere layer. And you have to think of the atmosphere and these different maps as topographic maps, like in geology or geography more specifically. A topographic map has contour lines and contour intervals, and on a topographic map that you would get from the USGS or something like that, the higher the mountaintop, then the more contour lines you have. And the same thing holds true, generally speaking, in the atmosphere. And right here, this 594 circle is indicative of a large mountain of air, the Bermuda High, the subtropical ridge, sitting out here over the Atlantic Ocean. And this part of it is thicker, or higher up in the atmosphere, a larger piece of air, if you will, that's a simple way to put it, than it is over here on the eastern part of the Atlantic. So this height line indicates a thicker, more robust ridge of high pressure, and Chantal is right there, showing up to the 500 millibar level, moving very briskly to the south of, let's get the telestrator back, to the south of this ridge. So it's moving right along with it, very brisk in its forward motion, as we well know. So what's going to happen out in time? Well, this is valid right about now as I'm doing this broadcast. Let's go out to tonight at around 8 o'clock Eastern Time. The ridge is still there. It fluctuates. It grows, expands, contracts, but it's still there for the most part. And there is Chantal represented at the 500 millibar level, still to the south of that ridge, moving through the northeast Caribbean Sea, probably still moving fairly fast. Let's go on out 48 hours. This will be valid tomorrow night. And again, you can see now we lose that 594 height line out here. We looked at this yesterday. As this trough of low pressure comes in, it erodes the ridge down, and it allows the storm, if it's still there, to begin gaining latitude, and it slows down because it's not being pushed along by this fairly strong gradient of very high pressure over the Atlantic, whisking things along in the trade winds. That's a fairly simplistic way to put it. It's more complex than that in the way fluid dynamics works, but the easiest way to think of this is that the less high pressure there is in the atmosphere, the more these tropical cyclones will want to turn north and head out towards the higher pressure, because these are low pressure systems and they are wanting to go into the flow of the atmosphere towards cooler regions of the globe to disperse the heat. But it's more complex than that, and we won't get into that today to bore you too much. The bottom line, it's going to slow down as it approaches Hispaniola and into the Bahamas. If we go on out here to day 3, this is valid on Thursday night into Friday. Here we see it in the Bahamas, probably moving much slower. Here's our trough of low pressure, and the ridge trying to hold on a little bit there. Chantal kind of stuck down there, slowing down. Going on out to day 4. This is valid Friday night into Saturday morning. And here it is, sitting in the Bahamas, the trough and its energy now lifting out, leaving Chantal behind. This is kind of like missing the bus, if you will. And there it is, just kind of stuck to the east of the Bahamas, maybe in the vicinity of the Bahamas, as that ridge tries to start building back in, and it won't allow Chantal to go on off to the northeast. Instead, it kind of gets left behind, and so as we go out to 120 hours, this is valid Saturday night into Sunday, we see that the low pressure trough in the atmosphere fading away, moving on out, lifting out, as the ridge starts to build back in over the top. And as it does so, we have this upper level low energy in the Gulf, and Chantal stuck down here. The ridge builds in and starts to shove it back to the west and southwest towards the Florida Peninsula in the longer range beyond the 5-day forecast frame that we're looking here. And I don't usually look beyond 5 days, since that's as far out as the Hurricane Center forecast goes. There's no reason to look anything beyond that. Usually, sometimes we will, and certainly no more than 7 days out. Notice too on the 5-day forecast, there's another system showing up at the 500 millibar level in the deep tropics here. There's a nice ridge outlined in the atmosphere. This will be to the south of that ridge, moving right along to the west. Maybe we'll have the D storm by sometime next week. We'll have to wait and see about that. That's far enough out in time we don't have to worry about it. Bottom line, though, it looks like if Chantal can survive its current environment and the trek across Hispaniola, it may be able to get into the Bahamas, where it could hang out for a little while, and then potentially move back to the west and southwest towards the peninsula of Florida, and then maybe into the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to have to wait and see. A very interesting scenario starting to unfold for this system as we watch it closely. Obviously, the first impacts and the impacts that we're most concerned about today will be for portions of the Lesser Antilles, and then eventually Hispaniola and the Bahamas. So a lot to keep up with. At least the good side here, it's not a powerful hurricane with a whole bunch of people on pins and needles worrying about it. It's certainly something to monitor and to take seriously, but we can all agree that at least we're not dealing with a beast out there. All right, well, that is it for today's discussion. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, my site. Always an honor to do these videos for you on Hurricane Pro and HD. Great apps to use to track hurricanes. Yes, I think so. Have a good rest of your Tuesday. I'll have more for you tomorrow.